What is up, guys? Man, I appreciate everybody tuning in on a Sunday, I guess morning, man. For some people, afternoon, maybe for some, man. But listen, y'all know what day it is. This selection Sunday for the college football playoffs, and so we had to go live to kind of break down all the latest news and everything like that. And it really wasn't a shock of who made the top four, but we did have to see where they were ranked, who was seated where. And we have our answer, man. Alabama moves to number one after their blowout win over Georgia in the SEC championship. Michigan sticks at number two as they just dismantled Iowa last night in the Big Ten championship. Georgia drops to three after their loss, and Cincinnati sticks at the number four spot, which is not really as surprising now that Oklahoma State lost last yesterday to Baylor in that last second goal line stand. Man, all the games lived up to the hype, man. And right now, so you'll have Alabama versus Cincinnati in the first round, and Michigan versus Georgia in the first round as well. So how I want to do this, man, I want you guys, if you're tuned in, to comment below, kind of your initial takeaways on the game. Are you excited for Cincinnati versus Bama, Michigan versus Georgia? Do you think Michigan or Cincinnati can pull the upset? Even though Michigan's number two, I would imagine Georgia's still probably going to be the favorite in that game when it finally gets here in just a few weeks. Also, number five was Notre Dame. Number six was Ohio State. Those were the first two teams out. For me, I know it really doesn't matter in the long run, but I really did feel like Baylor probably deserved that, fifth or sixth spot at least, man, after winning the Big 12 title. But it really doesn't matter. All those games are really automatic bids in, depending on conference championships and things like that. But for me, looking initially, with Alabama winning like they did, I had no problem with them jumping all the way to number one. I mean, you're looking at a Georgia team who didn't have a game within like 17 points all season long. Their defense never allowed over 17 points, and Alabama had like 300 or more total yards by the time we reached halftime yesterday. They absolutely embarrassed Georgia in Georgia, with that crowd probably being 70-30 Georgia fans too. And they just absolutely looked like the better team. Their defense was fast, caused a lot of turnovers, was wreaking havoc in the backfield. And the number one thing I was most impressed with Alabama yesterday, their offensive line. I mean, down the stretch, and I was talking to one of my friends who's a Georgia fan. He said that he has not seen Georgia's D line get pushed around like they did against Alabama. And for Alabama to come off a game where Auburn's defensive line absolutely, really just like abused them. I mean, 7 sacks, they had negative 2 yards rushing at halftime. It really shocked me that Alabama was able to come in and just manhandle that Georgia front with like a Jordan Davis and some of the defensive linemen they have, man. Let's see. Corey 8 said, I didn't expect that game to be so far apart. I agree, man. Listen, I can absolutely agree that, maybe picking Alabama wasn't the worst thing in the world, but man, to pick Alabama and say that they were going to win by what they did and look as impressive as they did really shocked me, Corey. I agree with you on that one. Leon said Alabama Michigan championship game, going to choke like they did yesterday. My dogs let me down too much. Now, Leon, the one thing I will say, and this will kind of go into like early previews of the matchups. Initially looking at how these teams match up, I do feel like Michigan is the best matchup for Georgia in the playoffs. And let me explain why. Because Alabama wasn't going to run the ball that much. Alabama's not a run first team. They're going to let Bryce Young have the ball. They're going to spread you out, and they're going to try to find Jamison Williams, Jaleel Billingsley, John Mechie, Slade Bolden. They're going to try to spread you out and let Bryce Young pick you apart. That really didn't play into Georgia's strengths. Their strengths are the front seven. So with Michigan, Cade McNamara is not going to beat you deep. Cade McNamara is not just going to be able to spread you out and pick you apart. Michigan is going to try to run it down your throat. And I think that plays right into what Georgia's defensive strengths are. Is Georgia going to let Michigan run Hassan Haskins, run Blake Corum, right down their throat. I don't know if that's the case, man. I think Michigan Georgia is probably the best first round matchup because of that, because it's the strength of Michigan's offensive line against against the strength of Georgia's defensive line. So for me, Leon, I do think Georgia got very lucky in terms of a first round matchup because they do get to face a Michigan team that, personally, I think they match up with very well. Bob Williams says dogs choke in big game again. Isn't this what got Mark Richt fired? Now, listen, Bob, that's that's an interesting topic because there were a lot of Georgia fans last night posting about how Mark Richt has done about the same thing. Their records are very similar. Their SEC championship experience is very similar, and there's really this big hump where they can't get over. They can't get over it in the big games, especially against Alabama, man. And for Kirby Smart to go out there and get beat like he did yesterday, I do think it's kind of a black mark on his resume that this was supposed to be the best team Georgia's had. I mean, they were, including myself, and that defense was historically great. And Bryce Young had no problem picking it apart yesterday. And your defense couldn't get any pressure. Your secondary had multiple coverage busts. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where the disconnect was, Bob, but for me, I agree with you, man. There's a lot of problems right now that got exposed yesterday for Georgia. Greg Hale said Utah is the reason why we needed to extend the playoffs. I'd put them against anyone in the country. Now, that's an interesting take there because let's just say, if we expanded the playoffs, I think that would give Baylor and Utah a chance to get in and see what they do, Greg. But I think a lot of people who haven't watched Utah are going to push back on you with that. But I mean, Utah's been playing just as good as anybody in the country these past probably 4 or 5 weeks. I'm going to be interested to see how they do in the Rose Bowl. So, Greg, if they go into the Rose Bowl and beat Ohio State, which is probably going to be the Rose Bowl matchup, if they go in there and beat Ohio State like they beat in Oregon, Greg, I think Utah next season is going to be very highly ranked. And Utah has a lot of players coming back, Greg. So I agree that with the playoff expansion, Utah and Baylor are probably the best examples of teams that you probably wish you could see in the playoffs, because the problem with the 14 playoff, and this has always been my argument with the 14 playoffs. You had 5 Power 5 champions, and you can only have 4 at the most go be represented. But what happens when Georgia and Bama take 2 spots, and then you have Cincinnati? There's only 2 Power 5 champions in the 14 playoffs. So I agree that this year is probably the best year to argue for expansion because of Utah, of Baylor. I mean, I think you could even throw in a Notre Dame and a Ohio State as teams that, what happens if they got in, or even an Ole Miss. Could Ole Miss not win a first round game depending on their matchup? I do think, in my opinion, that you do have a good argument this year on getting more than the 4 teams that got into the playoffs. UGA's quarterback, too many turnovers. Everything else is there. UGA has always been weak at quarterback. Daniels would have made the difference. All right, Leon and Bob. This is a conversation I definitely want to have, because for me, listen, I don't know how in the world you can. I don't think you can convince me that Stetson Bennett is a better quarterback than JT Daniels. I don't think you can make that argument right now. And so for me, I personally do think that JT Daniels would have made a difference. Would Georgia have won? I don't know. I won't go that far, but I do think JT Daniels would have had a better offensive performance than Stetson Bennett did, because you saw what happened when Georgia had to go away from the run game. All season long, Georgia ran the football, got a big lead, and once they got that big lead, Stetson Bennett was able to play without any pressure. But yesterday, getting down in the game, it really put a lot of pressure on Stetson Bennett to have to air the football out, and I don't think he was ready for that moment. And when you look at JT Daniels, especially how he was playing late last season, I feel like his arm strength is there, and I think, in my opinion, he probably would have made a bit of a difference, Leon and Bob, in my opinion. And listen, this goes back into question, and Kirby Smart's QB decisions have to be questioned eventually. You had you had Eason, you had Justin Fields. I mean, there's been a bunch of decisions where you're like, I don't know about that. So we're going to see what they do in the playoffs. So I would be very shocked if JT Daniels did not play in the playoffs. Let's see. Leon said Utah is legit. Bob said I would put Utah over Cincinnati. The 14 playoff was always stupid. At least make it 6 teams. Let the 2 top seeds have a bye week. 12 to 16 is much better. Uh, and he said, Bob said needs to be 8 teams, no buys and no automatic entries. I like that. This time of year is the only time where I think the FCS and Division Two wins with the postseason format. I agree, and yeah, and listen, I agree with Bob here too. There's going to be people who feel like they were snubbed, no matter how many teams are invited. But I do think that the FCS offers a great, measuring stick to how an expanded playoff could work. Now, the only thing I wish they would change in the FCS playoffs is how much money each team makes. I mean, you kind of lose money in the FCS playoffs for some teams, but I mean, and I've done an episode on it, and if you're subscribed, you probably saw it back on my 2 minute drill. You can go check out that playlist and find it. But I made an argument for a 12-team playoff. I think a 12-team is perfect because really and truly, once you get down into those, 10 to like 15 range, I feel like the distinctions are a little bit stronger than a top 10 team. And for me, when you only have it at 4, and the argument, and I know you guys have heard the argument on ESPN and heard the argument on other channels, is there's never more than 2 or 3 teams that can win the national title. Um, I don't think that's true at all. And for me, there's always teams that get hot early. And what about or get hot late? And for me, the number one thing is what about the teams who struggled early? Like, what about teams with freshman quarterbacks? What about teams with new coaches? What about teams with had injuries at the early points of the season? Why did those teams get punished for not being at full strength or not having their full team together? And so I feel like if you expand it past 4, it gives those teams a chance to kind of rebound and get their footing under them. And I feel like as college football gets more and more competitive and more as we see more expansion, I feel like there's no way you could tell me only 4 teams should get invited when there's 5 Power 5 conferences. That just doesn't that for me that just doesn't work. I'm good with 8. I'm good with 12. I think those would be the 2 options I would go with. I think 6 you would still run into the same problem, but 8 like Greg here said, you would perfect setup, Power 5 chance, a few open bids. 12-team playoff, I agree, is perfect as well. I think 12, and like AO said, 12 to 16 is good enough to have all the conference champs, and all the conferences have a chance to get into the playoffs. It should always be the best teams. I agree. Utah and Oregon are your perfect examples of being too hot early and late. Yeah, I agree. Listen, Oregon started out on fire, beating Ohio State. They were on a roll until they hit that Stanford game, and then really and truly the turning point for Oregon was C.J. Verdell's injury. And I know a lot of people will say running backs don't really matter, this and that, but when C.J. Verdell went down, Oregon's season really took a turn for the worse. Anthony Brown's not that type of quarterback that can carry your team to the promised land, and they didn't have the depth at running back behind Verdell and Dye at running back to really get them to the end. And also they were missing some DB pieces. The linebacking spot got hit with injuries. They had too many injuries down the stretch for me to really, I guess, get to the finish line. But then with Utah, they start Charlie Brewer, a Baylor transfer. He turns out to be atrocious. They bench him. They put in Cam Rising, and look at the way that team switched. And then also Tavian Thomas, a Cincinnati transfer, explodes onto the scene midway through the season, leads the Pac-12 in rushing touchdowns. And so for me, I agree, Greg. Utah and Oregon are your perfect examples of being too hot early and hot late in the season. Jay Bubba said, "Roll Tide, man." Listen, Alabama had a great game, Bubba. I'll keep it real with you, man. Alabama was so impressive yesterday. D2 and FCS play a max of 16 games. FBS only 15-game max. Do you want to play more football just to get hurt and miss draft stock? Oh, Lawrence, I mean, they're gonna have to work on some things, but for me, I think players will be more happy with having a chance to compete for a national title. Those teams like Baylor, those teams like Utah who won their conference championships and might have had a chance if we had more than 4 teams. And then also, yes, Notre Dame needs to join the conference, but I mean, 1 loss season and you got nothing to show for it. And then Ohio State as well has it. I mean, there's a lot of teams, Lawrence, I think you could say had an argument if we had an expanded playoff. But right now, I would say the four teams that I mean, there was no drama. Everyone knew who the four teams going into today was going to be getting in. But I agree that if you expand it, it gives more conferences, more teams a chance. And I've been on that boat for the end of time. And I know that some people are never going to agree that we should expand it. But so let's see. Has there been any news on when a playoff expansion may happen? So, Greg, I know they talked about potentially, and I believe the story came out a week or so ago, that the college football playoff committee, there's some people on the committee that want to expand it next year. But if they can't get it done next year, it'll be 2025 when the ESPN contract expires with the current college football playoff model. So it's either going to probably be next year or 2025, Greg, where that's really the earliest that you're going to see it expanded. So what they're going to have happen is everybody on the committee, all the conference commissioners, everything like that are going to have to agree to expand it. And it's really probably going to come down, Greg, to that new alliance that we saw form this all season between the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. If that alliance all votes together, I think you're going to see a lot of momentum for the expanded college football playoff. And luckily, you know, for the committee, I think that the ACC champ and the Pac-12 champ not being in, I think that gives it a lot of momentum for that. Let's see, Greg Hale, who would you put in for an 18 playoff today? With no automatic bids, Greg. I'll give you one with automatic bids for champions and no automatic bids. I think you would have the four that got in. You would have to put in Notre Dame. You would have to put in Ohio State. You would have to put in Baylor. And then you got one more spot. I think. Oh, this one's going to be tough. I would put in Utah, but knowing the college football playoff committee, they probably wouldn't do that. They would probably still stick in an Ole Miss or Oklahoma State. But for me, I would have Utah in that last spot. I think you would put in Ohio State. You would put in Notre Dame. You put in the four teams you have. I mean, that would probably be mine. But for me, with automatic bids, it depends on how you would want to do it. So if we did it with the model that they just proposed, you would have all your Power Five champions in there. So for me, it would be Alabama, it would be Baylor, and then you would have Utah, and let's see, Michigan would be in there. Then I mean, so you would have all five of the Power Five champs, and the top four would get bye weeks, which means Utah would not get a bye week, which I think is a little iffy. So you would have your top four Power Five champs getting bye weeks, but then Cincinnati would get in a large bid. You would get Ole Miss, Ohio State. You would get an Oklahoma State getting in, and also a Notre Dame getting in if you had the bye weeks like that. So I think it'd be the same top 10 teams, except you would have Utah slot in there for that Power 5 champion. The Big 12 commissioner, the only one holding it up. Lawrence, I think the Big 12 not making the playoffs this year probably helps that case, because I think the Big 12 commissioner needed Baylor to have a shot to get in, and Baylor wasn't even in the top 6. So, Lawrence, I don't know if that's going to be the case moving forward. That SEC championship low key reminded me of the 62-39 Michigan Ohio State game. That it really played out just like that. EA, I mean, really and truly. Listen, Georgia's defense had no answer once they were spread out, and once Bryce Young had time to pick them apart. There was zero answer for that offense yesterday. OSU doesn't deserve a spot after that crap they did yesterday. Listen, Leon, I agree they don't deserve a spot, but they would still probably put them in. I'm going to be honest with you. And, man, it shows you the type of, the inches away that you – like if he would have just dove for that pylon, he probably would have got in. But the fact that he didn't dive, he just kind of reached his arm out, really put him in a bad spot, man. So, I mean, Oklahoma State had every chance yesterday to win that game. And, I mean, on top, listen, I have a lot of opinions on the Oklahoma State game. Trust me, this is probably the last time the AAC can represent the conference with Cincinnati, because they are leaving the conference next year. Yeah, I believe they're leaving. Wait, it might be 2023, Jay Bubba. Actually, it might be 2023. So it's probably the last time the AAC is getting in, because they're also I'm pulling up the rankings right now, but they're losing UCF, they're losing Houston, and they're losing Cincinnati. Those were the top 3 teams in the conference this year. So it's probably the last year that the AAC is ever going to get a team in the playoffs until it's expanded, in my opinion. Let's see. I'm gonna pull up the full rankings here. Let's see. If you expand the FBS playoffs, FCS should play a 12 game regular season. Listen, I think they're going to talk about that, man. That's the biggest argument against it right now is that you have too many games. Rankings are out. Let's see. What's up, Blue Man? What's up, JSU Tigers, man? Great win on the SWAC championship yesterday, man. Great one. So the rest of the top 10 guys is Notre Dame at 5. Let's see. That's the AP. Never mind. Let's see. Um, So I've not seen the whole rankings yet. They're still talking about them, but Utah did slide into the top 10, it looks like. So for all you Utah fans, they're in the top 10. They're announcing bowl games as we speak right now. Let's see. Greg Hill said Michigan should be number one. Uh, okay. I got the argument there, Greg, because you could say, man, listen, what they did to Iowa last night was just ridiculous. I mean, they ran the score up last night on Iowa on purpose. I mean, they had the ball with, I believe, a minute left, and we're still putting points up on Iowa last night. Listen, Hassan Haskins has become a problem at running back, and listen, Aiden Hutchinson has made an argument to probably be the best player in the Big Ten. I'm talking about over C.J. Stroud, over Garrett Wilson, over everyone else you want to talk about. Aiden Hutchinson off the edge is a problem for Michigan, but I can see their argument to be number one because they blew out a top 15 team in Iowa. But what I think you ran into, Greg, is the perception that coming into the weekend, a lot of people thought Georgia was unbeatable, and Alabama absolutely dismantled them down the stretch. So I think that's why you got Alabama at number one, Greg. But I do think Michigan had a realistic argument to be number one after what they did, this weekend. Bob said no automatic bids ever. EA said Michigan has hella momentum, could definitely catch UGA slipping after their loss. What it's going to come down to, in my opinion, EA is one, can Cade McNamara have the game of his life? Because what I think Michigan is going to do, they're probably going to put everybody in the box. They're going to trust their DBs to play one-on-one coverage. Ringo and De'Aaron Kendrick are studs at those top corner spots. They're going to trust their guys on islands, and they're going to load the box, and they're going to say Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum are not running the football on us. You are going to have to make Cade McNamara throw it. And that's going to be the key is can Cade McNamara make those handful of throws that really get Michigan over the hump? And then on the other hand, can Michigan's front seven play like Alabama did yesterday? If they can get pressure on Stetson Bennett or JT Daniels, whoever goes out there for Georgia, if Hutchinson and Ajabo can get pressure on Daniels or Stetson Bennett, that's also going to play a huge factor. But the problem is Georgia likes to run the football right down your throat, and the defensive tackle spot is not the strongest for Michigan. So I am kind of worried about how the interior of the Michigan defensive line is going to play. And then also, we saw this weekend forcing turnovers is so important against Georgia. So if this secondary for Michigan, which has been great all season long, can force Georgia into turnovers, they're absolutely going to have a chance. But there's this Georgia team is going to go one of two ways, EA. Either this loss is going to galvanize the team and really have them pissed off and motivated to make a college football playoff run, or the loss is just going to completely demoralize the team and they're just not going to show up in the first round. And in that case, Michigan absolutely has a great chance to come away with the win in this one. Let's see. Bob Williams. Turns out lowly Auburn gave Bama his toughest game of the season. Who would have thought that? Listen, Bob, as an Auburn alum, not me. Listen, I previewed that game on the channel, and I had Alabama big in that one. I didn't think Auburn could give them anything. And listen, they played one hell of a game. But I mean, also, we're part of the off the ball network, and we were talking in the group chat last night. I don't think a lot of people understand the passion and the difference of playing a rivalry game of that magnitude on the road, going into Jordan-Hare Stadium, playing your state rival who plays you every year, who has your number. I don't think that may have been as indicative of what this Alabama team was compared to what we saw yesterday. And on top of that, Bob, I really do think the way Alabama won against Auburn really showed them that they could win on any game, regardless of how they play. I mean, Alabama probably hasn't played a 3 quarters of football that bad since Nick Saban took over as head coach and they played like Louisiana Monroe in his first season. I mean, that was arguably the worst 3 quarters of Alabama football that has ever been played under Nick Saban. And they still found a way to turn it around and come out with a win. And for me, I think that gave them all the momentum in the world going into this weekend. And listen, all the problems you saw Auburn expose, Georgia wasn't able to. Georgia wasn't able to expose the offensive line issue. Georgia wasn't able to consistently stop the run like Auburn. That they weren't able to get to Bryce Young at all, man. And Bryce Young was just able to pick them apart. And they had what 4, 5, 6 different coverage breakdowns where Mechie or Billingsley or Jamison Williams was running scot free. And for me, I think Alabama yesterday made a huge statement as listen, we haven't played our best football, but when we turn on our best football, we are way too tough to beat right now. But guys, as we run down, probably do about 10, 15 more minutes. Listen, comment below. What are your predictions for the college football playoff? How do you see it playing out? Who do you see winning the two first round games, and who do you see winning the national championship? Let's see. Georgia lost Alabama, but I don't see Michigan or Cincinnati beating Alabama. Oh man, or beating Georgia. I agree, man. Listen, right now, I think if Alabama plays like they did yesterday, they have to be the favorite. I mean, let's just be honest, they have to be the favorite going into the playoffs. But if Alabama comes out with their C or D plus game like they did against Auburn or LSU, then I think everybody has a chance right now. LSU really held Alabama to 20 points, rushing yards with 8 defensive starters out. EA, man, listen, I mean, they did. And I think a lot of those games really woke up Alabama. I mean, listen, and like Nick Saban said yesterday in this press conference, EA, he said, listen, that rat poison was good. He was like, usually y'all are praising us, y'all are giving us all this credit. And yesterday, or going into yesterday, y'all were tearing us down. You guys were saying that Georgia was going to run through us, Georgia was going to do this or that. And so I think you saw what happened when Alabama finally got to play as the underdog, which is a scary, scary sight in my opinion. I mean, listen, yesterday, in my opinion, EA was the statement game of Nick Saban saying that, listen, I can have this young team with a young quarterback who's never been in this moment. I can have no depth at the running back spot and everybody kind of be banged up. I got two main wide receivers out there that can go make plays against anybody. And then my defense is going to play its arguably its best game of the season. It was impressive, EA. But yeah, LSU and Auburn really made a statement when they played them. Let's see. Leon says, Cincy, I'm going for the movie ending. Oh, man. Leon, listen. If Cincinnati wins the national title, Leon, I think college football is going to explode. I mean, that would be the just most ridiculous storyline of all time because Cincy would have to get through Alabama in round one, and then Michigan or Georgia in round two. I mean, that would be arguably the greatest national championship run of all time for a group of five team to go win the national title in its first ever year. And listen, Leon, even if they beat Alabama, let's say on an upset and lose in the national title, you got to say, man, they got to build. Listen, they have to build a statue of Luke Fickell immediately on the campus of Cincinnati, man. Let's see, Bryce Young is smaller than Shador, but could throw 60-plus yard bombs. It's insane. Listen, and also, underscore, I think the biggest thing as well with Bryce Young is, I mean, his pocket presence, similar to, Shador, like I know all my SWAT guys are in here, similar to Shador, is on another level. Bryce Young never panics. He's always making the right decision. And his ability, and, CBS said it ad nauseum, man. Listen, if I heard CBS say this statement one more time in that Auburn-Alabama game, I was going to pass out. But his ability to be the point guard of his offense is on another level. I mean, listen, he is so calm in the pocket. His vision is on another level, and he can just pick you apart and make almost every throw on the field. And then on top of that, and I talked about it a little bit in my SEC championship preview, his ability to throw underneath. And I think he's really helped out by the fact that Jamison Williams and John Mechie can take a 5 to 10 yard pass and take it to the house by making one guy miss. I mean, guys, if you go back and watch the highlights of the SEC championship yesterday, the one touchdown play that Jamison Williams scored on, he took like that slant pass almost and just beat the safety to the corner who had a perfect angle on him. He is so explosive and so fast. I mean, he's one of my favorite players to watch in the country. He is a problem for any secondary. And I think it's going to be, listen, if there's a matchup in the college football playoff that I'm looking forward to the most, it's Ahmad Sauce Gardner for Cincinnati, the corner, against Jamison Williams at wide receiver. Listen, Ahmad Gardner has never allowed a touchdown pass in one-on-one coverage. And you got Jamison Williams, who might be the most explosive receiver in the country. I think that is a future NFL versus NFL matchup. That's going to be one of the matchups I am extremely, extremely excited to watch. Bob Williams says Auburn beats Bama with Bo Nix at QB, no doubt in my mind. Listen, I will agree with you on that, Bob. Even as I'm an Auburn guy, I will agree with you on that. Cincy equals Boise State 2.0. Ralph Johnson said Will Anderson told them post game, hell, we Alabama. Listen, they are. I mean, listen. Okay, I had like I said, Ralph. I had no problem with people picking Alabama. I thought it was one of those games where, yes, if Alabama won, they'd win a close one, but I never thought either team would have blown the other one out. I'm going to be honest with you. Georgia had them bracketed, and they still couldn't stop them, man. How do you stop that? I agree. Underscore. They had a high safety on them, and they had the dude underneath, and they sometimes were triple teaming Jamison Williams, and he was just too fast for them to stop. Listen, for my members on the channel, I'm doing a film breakdown on, I believe, tomorrow on the FAMU Southeastern game. I'm probably going to have to do a film breakdown on Jamison Williams in this game and in some of the games this season, because he's so fast that he can beat almost any coverage you put against him, man. He is unstoppable. And listen, the fact he could not see the field at Ohio State, he was fourth string for the Buckeyes last year. He did not see the field, and he's doing this for Alabama. Really, really just exemplifies what Nick Saban can do with some of these transfer players. Lawrence said cold weather national championship game in a cold weather stadium, Cincy versus Michigan. Man, and listen, that attendance, like I understand, the attendance of the national championship is always going to be crazy. But could you imagine Michigan versus Cincinnati in Indianapolis? That game would be packed out. And listen, I'm also working on my media passes for that, so y'all might get live coverage from the national championship if I can swing some media passes. I'm in review right now, so hopefully we'll have the Bluebloods live at the national championship this year. So we will definitely see. Whoever said GA fans. With Bo Nix coming back next season, how many Auburn players choose to hit the portal? Bob, there's been a bunch of Auburn players right now to already hit the portal. I believe Auburn's had 5 or 6 players already transfer, but with Nix coming back, I do think it helps with some of the continuity on the team. I think it helps some of the wide receivers. I think it helps Tank Bigsby, some of the offensive linemen not to possibly transfer, because losing Nix would have been a huge loss for Auburn, Bob. And I think him being one of the unquestioned leaders of that team, if he would have ended up leaving and not staying with Auburn, I think that would have really, really hurt Auburn's chances next year. We're talking about the same UGA staff that had players give up a touchdown to Devontae Smith on 4th down in a national championship. Yeah, listen, it's 2nd and 26, and they allowed Devontae Smith to run a streak route right behind them. And all Tua had to do was lay it out there. The safety got caught looking on the inside. The safety, as soon as he saw a streak, should have taken himself right outside the hashes with him. But instead, he got caught looking in the pocket, and Devontae Smith ran straight behind him, and Tua threw a dime to him. So, yes, the same UGA staff did that. Urban Network said, Georgia fans, what happened? Man, but listen, I'm excited for all of these games. I think Michigan, Georgia is going to be one that I'm extremely looking forward to due to the run game versus that Georgia defense. And then listen, I don't know how many points Alabama's going to be favored over Cincinnati, but I want to ask y'all. I'm going to ask y'all 2 more questions, then I'm going to jump out of here because I'm going to drop a recap episode of the week with some of the conference championship games. But the first question I have for you guys is, what is a good showing for Cincinnati? So I know almost nobody in here probably expects them to win, but how many points does Cincinnati have to keep it close by for people to say, okay, they deserve to be in. That's a great performance by them. How many points do they have to, keep it? Like, what would you consider keeping it close and keeping a positive experience for Cincinnati if they can't beat Alabama? Like, I need y'all to let me know what will satisfy y'all if for Cincinnati uh, in 2 weeks when they play Alabama. Underscore. So it's Cincinnati versus Alabama, Michigan versus Georgia. Yeah, underscore. That'll be the first round matchups. That'll be the first round matchups this year in the playoffs. Gator fans rooting for Michigan, beat the Mutts. People forget UGA is running a version of that Bama defense. Saban knows how to attack it. 1,000%, Ralph. Listen, Nick Saban has Georgia's number. He has Kirby Smart's number, and they absolutely made a statement this weekend with how he attacked that defense and really exposed some of the major problems. Now, the question is, can Michigan find the same way to expose those problems? That'll be a whole nother question as we get into the playoffs. Underscore says 7 points. So 7 points at least. So since he's got to keep it within 7. Leon says within 10 or a win. Lawrence says 10. Yeah, listen, I agree. I think if you can keep it 10 or below, if you're Cincinnati, that's a great that's a great appearance. Ralph said 10 or less because when you look, Notre Dame couldn't keep it within 10. Oklahoma couldn't keep it within 10. I mean, really and truly, not many people have been able to keep it within 10. I mean, Clemson with Kelly Bryant couldn't keep it within 10. So for me, I agree. I think 10 or less would be a great showing for Cincinnati, but a win, man, would be a program-changing win. Urban said 14 or less. Okay, and 2, if Cincinnati won, would it be one of the biggest upsets in college postseason history, man? I mean, it would have to go right up there with Utah beating Alabama in 2009. It would have to go right up there with UCF beating Auburn. I mean, how big of an upset would Cincinnati over Alabama be for you guys, and what would it do for college football playoff expansion? Do you guys think that Cincinnati winning would convince the college football playoff committee that expansion needs to be imminent and that more group of 5 teams need to get in? That'll be my last question for you guys. We'll kind of go over the answers here and get out of here. But yeah, so will a Cincinnati upset change how fans and the committee views group of 5 teams getting into the playoffs? He said, yes, the biggest upset. Leon said it will only be an upset because of the name. Oh, that is true. There's a lot to go into that. In terms of, let's see, yes on expansion. All I'm gonna say, if I see Jamison beat a triple team against Cincy, it's a good game. That's gonna be the number one thing. So underscore. Georgia's rush defense against Michigan's running attack is going to be the biggest matchup in that game. But you guys forget, I mean, Cincinnati has a top 10 passing defense, and they have for 2 years now with Ahmad Gardner and Kobe Bryant at those corner spots. And Ahmad Gardner, a lot of people think is easily a first-round prospect. And I know he goes by Sauce, but I mean, it's Ahmad Sauce Gardner, but hasn't allowed a touchdown all year or all his whole career for 3 seasons. So for me, I think I agree that matchup, Jamison versus the Cincy secondary, is going to be huge, man. Because if Cincy can find a way to try to slow down that passing attack or force some turnovers, that's going to be giant. But also, the other thing is, I don't know how many Cincy games everyone's watched here. There's such a second half team, and that really worries me because yesterday they were only up 14-13 going into halftime, and they ended up pulling away, and it was like 35-13 at the end of the third quarter. Earlier in the season, they were tied with Murray State at halftime, but then exploded for a 42-7 win in the second half. There's such a second half team that if they let Alabama jump on them big early, I think you can see it really, really get out of hand. So that's the other concern I have with Cincinnati in the playoffs right now. But guys, one last time in the college football playoff rankings, Bama at 1, Michigan at 2, Georgia at 3, Cincinnati at 4. So we'll have Bama versus Cincy in round 1 and Michigan versus Georgia. But guys, listen, I appreciate y'all taking some time out of your Sunday to tune in with the Blue Bloods here. Listen, we're dropping a conference championship recap later today. And then, of course, going into the week, man, we got some interviews. We got some player interviews dropping this week as well, starting tomorrow. And then also we're going to start previewing bowl games, championship matchups, everything like that. And of course, tomorrow night, we will be live recapping the second round of the FCS playoffs. So make sure to tune into that as well. So if you're new, subscribe, turn on your post notifications. But until next time, guys, the Blue Bloods are out.